there's been a lot of conversation, and I know there are so many details to this part of the discussion, right, as to who is what and who's responsible for what. But I think that it is um, a valid question to ask, where should Black Americans stand on this issue, right? And some people say that we should stand for those who have been killed. There have been over 1,000. This is just one of the numbers, and I'm sure you probably see some different numbers, Suzette. But they've said that there are already 1,000 people that have been killed during the course of this conflict on both sides, both on Israel and Palestine side. But there's a new fervor around what's happening, what we're seeing internationally, which I think is very interesting. Um, the big silver lining of this, Suzette, is even though many folks may not know the intricate details and all of the history of Israel and the Palestinian conflict that has been raging for decades, the big thing is that there is some interest from Black folks in this country to want to learn a little bit more about this level of geopolitics, right? So I think that that's a silver lining that can come out of this situation. But there are some other underlining pieces that I'm starting to see, that if some Black folks are feeling like, look, if you're Black, you should be standing with Palestinians. If you're not quote unquote Black, you would probably stand with the Israelis. Just want to get your take on the cultural part of this conversation. Again, this is big. We're going to try to do our part to just break it down into small pieces. But I think culturally something is happening here where Black America is trying to figure out, where do I stand? And more importantly, who do I stand in solidarity with? Do you stand in solidarity with those who have been, quote unquote, historically oppressed in that part of the country, in that part of the world? Do you stand with Israelis whose women and children have been killed as a result of this latest attack from Hamas? It leaves us in a very peculiar predicament here.
Yes, this is really a much difficult question to answer, because I'm looking at the complexities as you've raised that lie in the question as to, where we as African American, Black American people should show our solidarity. So first and foremost, as we always kind of point out, is that Black people, we are not monolithic. Black people are on many sides of this issue right now as we speak. I know there have not been any recent polling, because I was looking before we came live to say accurately what we believe, but there have been many articles like the one in the Griot recently, talking to one geopolitical expert as to what she is seeing. She works in national security, and her point of view was that she sees a split. Now, again, I think if you line up 10 Black folks from across the country, you are going to see a diverse a range of opinions, because people feel very strongly on both sides, if you want to call it as sides. I'm on humanity's side. But for me personally, looking at what happened, first and foremost, I want to acknowledge that this was a terrorist attack by Hamas. And no matter how you feel about the innocent people, whether those on the Israeli side, just the regular civilian, everyday people that woke up last Saturday at 7 a.m. with terrorists in their bedrooms, at their doorsteps, doing what savages do, cut open people, killing people in the most horrific ways. There is a larger conversation that is being sparked about, how did we get here? So I think there's some distinctions that we need to make between Hamas, that terrorist kind of armed, rebellious, some would call it jihadist even, and others who are looking at the innocent people who are sitting inside of the Gaza Strip, right? Those who you did refer to as Palestinian, those who are of Arab descent, that live within those borders, that confined 25-mile strip within the prescribed border of what is Israel. So there are some folks who are now looking at it saying that what we've seen in social media, and again, they don't speak for every Black person, and I read two specific organizations, Black Lives Matter, Grassroots. I think they're out of California. We've actually had them here. And I think there was one, I don't want to get it wrong, Black Lives Matter, I believe it was in the Chicago area. Mm-hmm. Both showed, on their X accounts, on their formerly known as Twitter accounts, these type of messages. We support Palestinians. We support, the suffering and what's going on there in Gaza. But I think we need to also, be very conscientious that there are a lot of African Americans that stand solidly with Israel and their right to exist and their right to self-determination, as well as see the plight of the Palestinian people, saying that they have a right to exist and to dignity and self-determination. So this is a very multi-layered answer, but I know we have to take a quick break, but we can get into it as to why there are African Americans and Black people as a whole across United States and the diaspora that feel, very strongly one way or another. So there's not one answer as to where we should be, but we've seen some vocal support for the Palestinian cause, but we've also seen folks come out and straight up condemn what terror was just unleashed on the Israeli people in this attack. So there are many of us on both sides.
And you know what, Suzette? It's like I said, this is decades. So for those who are just becoming conscious of this thing, you have to, I think to some degree, you have to kind of go as far back to the beginning or as close to the beginning as possible and see, because I think that's where the root of the issues, and I think that's where the problems really start, considering that history. So I think you're right in the respect of, we're at this place. These two, nations of people we're right here. But it's going to be super important, I think, for Black America that we understand the history and try to listen to those scholars within our community who can give us some guidance, so that way we can have some light moving forward. Because as much as this stuff is happening and I see all types of stuff, like I feel like a lot of people, and I think a lot of us are still in the dark because this is not a part of your normal study of things. If you study geopolitics, that's one thing. If you keep up on what's going on in the Palestinian, Israeli, type of movements, that's something. But in terms of the average Black person, quote unquote, I'm not saying average, I'm just saying the quote unquote, your average Black citizen, we're not in a part of the conversation. We're not at the table when it comes to making decisions about this. So if we do stand in solidarity, then we got to know what we're standing for and what we're standing against at the same time. And I think that requires us to study a little bit, to learn the history. I think that requires us to get some good guidance from people around us, those who have been involved in, breaking these things down. And I think that it requires us to use the best of intelligence to be able to say, you know what? All right, this is how we're going to move forward. There are so many different dynamics at play during the course of this conversation. My big thing is like, okay, I'm glad to see that Black folks are expressing themselves and at least starting the process to understand geopolitics, because that's what this is, right? And more importantly, starting to understand some of the history of this. But there are many different dynamics. Here are some of the key factors that I thought, Suzette, and I want to get your take, and crew, I want you to join us in the conversation, because many of you, I will say some, I'm not going to say many, Suzette. Let's say some of the crew are simply saying, not our battle, staying out of it. We're going to stay out of this, But my concern, here's my concern, y'all. As much as we'd like to believe, and I'm not saying I'm trying to be Mr. Doomsday here, but as much as we can say, all right, let's stay out of this, when I heard President Biden yesterday, Suzette, say 14 Americans were kidnapped, a couple of Americans were bombed or were killed during that attack by Hamas, I started thinking about, and y'all tell me if I'm wrong in thinking this, I started thinking about how wars have been started before, where there were American citizen casualties as a result of two other nations fighting each other, and then the United States being brought into a situation. We can probably go back to every major war that this country has been engaged in. And draw and connected the dots to show the link that America was involved in that war because of some interest. Now it could have been oil, but it could have been American lives, and we've seen that time and time again. That's oftentimes the precipice for getting involved, to having boots on the ground. So when I heard the president say that, talking about the human atrocity of those who were killed from by the Israelis that died, the ongoing conflict, and then when he said that he started talking about those 14 Americans who were involved in this situation, kidnapped and everything, and some had died and all of those. I was like, oh my God, are we getting pulled in? Matter of fact, for those who don't know, Senator Cory Booker, who is, of course, the black senator, our black senator, he was over there when the attack started to happen. He said, according to a report, that he was just taking a jog, and one of his staff members had reached out to him while he was jogging and said, "You need to take cover." And then, boom, the attack started to happen. So he could have been one of the casualties, an American casualties of that. So I'm just putting these things out here real quick, Suzette. But along with the loss of life and those who were kidnapped, the other elements that I see is that some people say Hamas does not necessarily, quote unquote, represent the Palestinians or the Palestinian efforts to broker some level of independence, that they're kind of working as this kind of rogue group, and they have links to Iran. So that's one of the things that I've saw. The other thing is, on the United States and Israel side, the unequivocal support, financial support, that the United States has given Israel each and every year. When you're talking about billions of dollars for military aids, unequivocal, unprotested, bipartisan aid that's given by our country to Israel. So that's another dynamic of this. And then I think the other point is Black Americans being able to stand in solidarity with those who are oppressed globally. That when we start to open ourselves up to reaching across the ocean to stand in solidarity, then that broadens the movement for us. And I agree with that. But that's another part of this process, is like, we should be standing with those who are oppressed. We should be standing with those who have been under, quote unquote, tyrannical rule. So I want to kind of get your take on this, because I know it's a lot of different pieces, it's a lot of different dynamics, but there's certainly some pros and cons of us being at least involved or at least engaged. What's your take?
So first and foremost, I think as Americans, we have to pay attention and we have to be involved, as you just stated, whether it's because of our tax dollars that are spent in this region, and knowing that what happens in this region does have an impact as our country goes, whether it's getting involved militarily or otherwise. We have a stake as Americans in what is happening in the Middle East. Let's take it back a few decades so we can understand. And again, we can go back a couple centuries, really. As you said, you have to understand the genesis of what, now, no pun intended. I know a lot of people are quoting the Bible in the chat, but looking at fast forward to World War II and what happened. When we talk about oppressed people, when we talk about historical genocide and what happened to Jewish people in the war with the Nazis, 6 million of them were annihilated by a regime that was just in its purest form evil. So beyond that war, from 1941 to 1945, after that war, the state of Israel came into being. And again, there were so many different talks between the Allies, or what became the United Nations, and Arab countries that are in that region. And long story short, and again, I'm not an expert in Middle Eastern history or geopolitics. I'm just giving you the short version of contextual history, so that we understand how did we get here. So you had a state that was formed by UN charter, but many of the surrounding Arab nations didn't agree to this the border formation of what is now today the state of Israel. So you had a strip of land that extended out of Egypt, what is now Gaza. You had the West Bank, which is also containing a lot of people who were made refugees after the formation of Israel. So you have groups of people who claim, ancestral heritage to this land, and then you also have our Jewish brothers and sisters who were given this land based on what happened to them in Europe. They were given a homeland, somewhat of a reparation, if you will, so that they could be living in peace and harmony and taken out of the despicable atrocities that had just occurred in World War II. So you have this dispute that has been going on. Israel's going to be 75 years old. And you also have folks within these territories, the Gaza Strip, who are looking for self-determination and a way to actually live a dignified life as well. However, the people of Gaza have not had an election since 2007 and have been de facto taken over by, run by Hamas. And again, there's a distinction between what is going on with the government of that, or the takeover of the military by, the military, which I call it outlying wing of terrorists called Hamas, and the actual people who want to live, breathe, and go about a dignified life. In Gaza, the poverty rate is about 81%. About half of the population does not work or has no means of earning a living. They depend on aid. And there has been a blockade of supplies for quite some time now, where there's no food, etc., only like aid-based relief for 2 million plus people. The size of the land is about twice the size of Washington, D.C., but has about 3 times as many inhabitants. 2.2 million or so people live there, and it is a grievous situation for them. Nonetheless, this militaristic arm has taken it upon themselves to, within its own charter, within that organization, Hamas's self-determined reason for existence is to destroy Israel. That's what there's no like, let's live side by side, let's figure out peace solution, let's figure out how we do this together. No, they have taken up arms, and as we saw in what they just conducted, did some of the most heinously barbaric and again, to civilians, not to another military, ran into people's homes, and because of their hate-filled ISIS-like approach, if you want to call it that, wreaked terror upon over 1,000 people in this surprise attack. They were ambushed right on the border there. Now the people in Gaza have to suffer, because what would you do if your country was attacked in this type of quite barbaric way? They shut off all water, all electric, all food and other supplies to Gaza. And now you have a civilian population that is in peril sitting there because of what a militaristic arm and that has controlled, if you will, the area and the government has done. So we want to make distinctions between the people who are leading this terroristic group and the day-to-day people that live and are trying to survive there. But nonetheless, we also have to look at what the mindset of those who have been oppressed. Again, I think people now look at the prosperity of Israel and prosperity of folks who, since the Holocaust, have come, mighty long way. But they too were, or are, I could say, very much a persecuted group. So when we're talking about people who are marginalized and persecuted, I think it can be there are ways in which people can interpret the same set of facts quite differently. But there are folks that know, because of the history of what happened during World War II, this was an essential step in forming some sort of peaceful and democratic established state in the Middle East. To bring it forward to now, if we look at who surrounds Israel, there have been a lot of governments, like you've mentioned, Iran and others, that are outright hostile to the United States. There is a geopolitical advantage of having a democratic partner in a state like Israel, so that we can exert our influence, like it or not, because that's what we're in the business of, right? Maintaining a world order, hopefully, that the United States can have influence in, and not creating a situation where there are countries that have other rogue actors. If they're Hamas in Gaza, there's Hezbollah and other enclaves. There are all
Hmm.
kinds of terroristic factions going on, and the United States is looking at, again, a long-term partner. We also have to recognize there are a lot of people in Israel who have dual citizenship with the United States and Israel. So there are tons of Americans. I
A
think the
lot
lady,
of our elected officials.
yeah, exactly.
A lot of elected, and then see, and I got to take a quick pause, Suzette, but that's part of the reason that I think we're in this situation as a country, just simply because we're so closely linked to Israel. And I'm saying as a country, as an administration, every single administration from Biden all the way back have shown this this unequivocal support for Israel. But when there's, and I've seen this, and this is not just all for Roger, you just want, but when you talk about Palestinian hurt, Palestinian pain, and especially looking at the sanctions that the Palestinian people have been operating under, that same level of support is not there. Every single administration, presidential administration, has made kept that money train going. So if the United States is serious about preserving or saving people's lives, then you have to look at, okay, in this particular case, yes, okay, there's an attack by Hamas, but is this a ongoing thing? Has the Palestinian people been has Palestine imposed sanctions on Israel? Like, who really has the power in this situation, right? And I think that we have to figure out, and this is the very hard part, folks. I'm not saying I got all the answers, or nor Suzette, but I think in a situation like this, you got to go down to what is right and what is just. Peace, I'm Faraji Muhammad, host of The Culture. And brothers, we need to talk. There's been much discussion about the state of the black man in our community, whether it's in politics, education, or in the home. My brothers, we are struggling to lead the way, which is why The Culture will be hosting the Black Men Summit, where we'll be redefining and celebrating Black manhood. This special series will kick off on the 28th anniversary of the historic Million Man March on Monday, October the 16th at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. I'll be talking to some of Black America's most prolific, dynamic, thought-provoking Black men activists, scholars, and leaders about our role, our power, and our future. So tune in and join the conversation as an online culture crew member for The Culture's Black Men Summit, redefining and celebrating Black manhood. Starting Monday, October 16th through Friday, October 20th, 4 p.m. Eastern Time each day, right here, exclusively here on the Black Star Network.